Good morning, everyone. In our last discussion, we have acquainted ourselves with the simple tenses, and now our journey has brought us to the chamber of perfect tenses. We will learn here about present and past perfect tenses. We will learn how to use them, their formula, and also how to conjugate verbs in the present perfect and past perfect tenses. But before we start with all that, let's just revise what we have learned till now. That is, the function of verbs, and what is tense, and what are aspects. So, if you remember, the word verb indicates action. Main verbs, auxiliary verbs, their combinations, they all represent the time of the action and also how the action is perceived. To make it even more simple, let's just think about how our life is defined by our action. Those actions are bound in time. What we do today, that is, in the present time, is because what we have already done yesterday, that is in the past time, and what we do today, again, in the present time, right now, will make us what we will be tomorrow, that is in the future time. So you see the verbs, they have some dual purpose. Number one, they show us whether something is going on right now in the present or whether something is done already in the past. They also tell us whether something will happen next in future. And apart from all this, they also tell us whether the action is habitual or a one-time matter or a repeated action. Now, what are tense? Tense represents the time of the action. For example, we have one arrow here moving straight forward, and there are two markers on this arrow. The marker right at the beginning indicates the past time, the time that which we have left behind, and the middle marker represents the current now, the present time, the time which we are living in at the moment. And the arrow that moves ahead from the present, that indicates the future time towards which we all are moving. Now we have to remember that only two forms, that is the present and past, they have their own unique verb forms. The future makes use of modal auxiliaries and they too have their own past and present forms. So what we are trying to establish here is that the future tense or the future form has no unique verb form of its own. They make use of the present form only, and they make use of shall or will, which are modal auxiliaries, and they too have their own past and present form in should or would. Now the present and past, they use their unique form to indicate the present time and the past time. And apart from these two forms, today we will talk about another form, which is the past participle form. We will come to that shortly, but before that, let's revise aspect. Aspect deals with the perspective of the viewer regarding the action. So how we see the action, whether we see the action completed. If the action is completed, we call it perfect in aspect. Or maybe the action is incomplete. In that case, it will be called imperfect in aspect. Sometimes the action is going on, that is continuous or progressive in aspect. Sometimes the action is repeated, it is called iterative aspect. And action that happens regularly is of habitual aspect. Now we will talk about the perfect aspect. If you remember, the perfect aspect indicates action which are already completed. Now the completed actions are also bounded in time. The perfect aspect shows us completed actions which are also bounded in time. Perfect aspects are expressed with have verb and the past participle form of the main verb. So remember, we are talking about the present form and the past form and another extra form, the past participle form. The past participle form is the third form of the verb. The first form is the present, the second form is the past, and the third form is the past participle form. So now we will talk about the formula in a nutshell. Basic formula, we will elaborate on this afterwards. In the present perfect tense, we use the subject and then we put has or have and then the third form of the verb, that is the past participle form of the main verb, and then we place object. In past perfect tense, we have only had. So subject and then had and then the third form of the verb and then object. If you remember, third form is the past participle form. And in future perfect, we use subject and we bring in the modal auxiliaries shall or will. After that, we use have verb, the root form have, and then the past participle form of the main verb, the action which we are talking about, and then the object. Now let us talk about the present perfect. So to indicate a situation that starting in the past continues to the present. So present perfect indicates a situation which has already started at some point in the past and that action continues even to now. Now this continuation can be even broken into three separate categories. We will talk about that shortly. But first let's have some example. For example, we have studied at the school for past 5 years. So what happens here? This particular school, we joined the school at least 5 years back at some point in the past, and we are still now studying here. So, indicating a situation that started in the past and continued to the present. Now, let us break it even further to express a situation that is completed recently. Again, the action, the situation started in the past but completed just now, right now, maybe a few minutes or few moments back. For example, the train has arrived at the platform. So the train was coming, a situation, the train was coming to this particular station, a situation that started in the past. And it has just arrived at the platform. So it is completed, but completed recently. The train is still there. Now, to elaborate it further, we can say to indicate an action that is done already but is still relevant at the moment of speaking. You see, if the train is still at the platform, it means the train number one hasn't left the platform, and number two, no other train can come to that platform because it is still there. So, the presence of the train, the arrival of the train is still relevant at the moment of speaking. Let's have another example. I have already completed the assignment. So the speaker who has already completed the assignment, his action is relevant because he won't have to do the same assignment again. It is already completed. Now, to indicate an action that continued for a certain duration and is completed at the time of speaking, something that continued for some time, some duration, some length of time. As you remember, we said perfect aspect indicates action or situation which are completed and bounded in time. So, the action continued for a certain duration and is completed. For example, his health has worsened drastically in the last 3 days. So his health condition has gotten worse and it has gotten worse for a duration last 3 days. It is completed at the time of speaking. So that's what present perfect is all about. Now we will talk about the past perfect tense. It is very easy to indicate a past event completed before another in the past time. Such sentences have a principal clause and a subordinate clause, joined by after, before, by the time, when, and so on. So basically, what happens? Two actions they take place in the past. Now, between these two actions, obviously, one action takes place before the other. So the action that takes place before or the action that takes place first that becomes the past perfect tense. And the action that takes place after the first action, that becomes simple past tense. Now, these two actions, the sentences or the clauses that indicate these actions, they are joined by subordinate clauses, by some time indicator like after, before, by the time, when, and so on. Let's have an example to make this even more clear. By the time we reached the station, the train had left. So you see, at the point of speaking, that is right now, we are talking, discussing this thing right now. So at this point, two actions have already happened in the past. We have reached the station and the train, it has left. Now, between these two actions, the train left before we reached the station. So the train had left, it becomes past perfect tense. And the action that happened afterwards, after the leaving of the train, that is our reaching the station, that becomes simple past. We reached the station. And as you can see, these two clauses are joined together by the time indicator by the time. We can also use this past perfect tense to indicate unreal condition or unfulfilled conditions in counterfactual conditionals. So what is this? You see, something has happened, done, completed, all right. But what if something happened in a different manner. We are not saying that the different thing has actually happened, but we are imagining that it could have happened. Things could have been different. So to indicate that difference, we use past perfect tense. How? Let's have an example. I would have listened to her if she had requested me properly. So you see, her requesting or her telling, my listening to her, all these things are done in whichever way we have done it, but we have done it. It is completed. We cannot change that fact. But suppose if she had requested me properly, then what would have happened? I would have perhaps listened to her in a more better way. So you see, this is an unreal condition, unfulfilled condition. This is not going to happen again. The actual thing has already happened. So we are imagining things, we are considering things, how things could have been different. And when we indicate such unfulfilled conditions or unreal conditions, then we use past perfect tense in counterfactual conditionals. Now let us talk about the formula of these tenses in great detail. The present perfect tense uses in affirmative sentences subject and then has or have and then the third form of the verb and then object. Now you may ask whether we use has and have everywhere or not. You see, we reserve the has only for the third person singular number. All other person, first person, second person, third person plural even and singular and plural both, we use have, except third person singular. Third person singular includes the pronouns he, she, it, or any singular name, any individual name. With them, we use has. And we use the third form of the verb. If you remember, what is the third form of the verb? Yes, it is the past participle form. If we are talking about negative sentence, we use one not in between the has or have and the past participle form of the verb. The remaining structure remains the same. If we are talking about interrogative sentences, we use the has or have at the beginning of the sentence. We bring it before the subject and then we place the third form of the verb and then object. Now, as you can see, there are two not in brackets in this formula. This is basically for negative interrogative questions. Now, what is this indicating? You see, the not can be placed either before the subject or after the subject on two positions, but we will not place two nots in the same question. So you see, either you place the not before the subject or you place the not after the subject. So basically has or have at the beginning, then perhaps you may use the not here, then subject, and then the third form of the verb, and then object. That is all for our present perfect formula. Next we'll talk about the past perfect formulas. Again the same thing, subject with had and then the third form of the verb and object. In this case, as you see, we don't have any other forms, only had. If we are to make negative statements, then we use one not with had, subject, then had not, then the third form of the verb and then object. If we are to make interrogative sentences, that is question sentences, we will bring the had at the beginning and then we place the subject and then the third form of the verb, the past participle form of the verb and then object. Again, you can notice that there are two not in this sentence also. Again, that indicates the two places where we can place a not in a negative interrogative sentence. We can place it either before the subject or we can place it after the subject. So, had not, then subject, then the third form of the verb and then object. This or had, subject, then not, then the third form of the verb and then object. We will make this clear with some conjugation of verbs afterwards. But let us first have some diagram, the diagram of perfect tenses. As you can see, we have the same arrow with the past, present, and the future on it. Now you see, there is one marker in the case of present perfect tense, there is one marker in the past segment. From there, the action is moving towards the now. It is either completed just as it touches now, or it may continue from now also. So, as you can see, this indicates the present perfect tense. In the past perfect, however, the same situation, but there is one and there is another action, but both in the past tense. Before the present, before the point when we are speaking right now, discussing this thing, both the actions have already happened before now. So, past perfect indicates the gap, the time. The first action that has happened becomes past perfect, and the second action that has happened becomes simple past. Now let's talk about the conjugation of the verbs. We will conjugate with the verb play. Let's first talk about the present perfect. As you can see, we have three persons, first, second and third person, and each has singular and plural, two numbers. So remember the formula was subject, has or have, then the third form of the verb and then played. So I have played football. If we want football as the object, we have played football. Again, you have played remains you have played. He, she, it. See, here we use has. In the third person singular, we use has. He, she, it has played becomes they have played in plural. Now let's talk about the past perfect. Again, here we have the same structure of three persons and two numbers. First, second, third person and singular and plural number. So I had played, we had played. You had played remains, you had played. And he, she, it had played. Here we don't change it to something else. Had remains had. Had played becomes they had played. So here we end our discussion. Hope you have understood the perfect tenses perfectly. If you have any questions, leave a remark.